excited to have you all here tonight. And this is part of our new After Hours discussion series, Elephant in the Room, Small Talk, Big Issues, which unpacks the big, thought-provoking, and sometimes controversial topics from the museum world and beyond. And tonight, I know you're all here for, as I said, facts about dire wolves, clearing up misconceptions fueled by recent advances in biotechnology. And we're so excited to be able to put this. I want to thank my team for doing this at the last minute, director's prerogative. I think this would be a great topic to talk about, and they pulled it off. So I just want to say thank you to all the staff. So on behalf of the museum, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for tonight's talk, Charles Annenberg Weingarten, Vice President, Director of the Annenberg Foundation, and founder of Explore.org. I'm sure many of you have seen Explore.org. It's the world's leading live nature cam network with more than 200 cameras on 5 continents across the globe. Charles has directed and produced more than 300 short films as a filmmaker himself. In addition, he is the founder of Dog Bless You, a leading provider of service dogs, which celebrates the special bond between people and their dogs. Charlie has a master's degree from USC School of Cinema Television and a bachelor's from Duke University. He serves on the board of counselors for the USC School of Communications and Journalism. So please give me a big hand welcoming our moderator for the evening, Charles Annenberg Weingarten.
Well, hello. Are we allowed to say it? Well, let me first introduce everyone I'm with. Excuse me. Let's get ready. They say welcome to the elephant in the room, but I guess tonight could be welcome to the wolf in the room. And maybe we should begin with just kind of an old ancient howl. Dog bless you, but I'm feeling the wolf energy in me. So, sorry, I'll stop. Anyways, I was given a script. I don't really like a script. I like to be verite and real. My mantra at Explore has always been Sesame Street for adults meets Never Stop Learning. And what I always loved is interviewing, meeting selfless, extraordinary leaders. And tonight, we're with 3 extraordinary women, 3 selfless leaders who have really pioneered themselves in their respective fields. And that said, I'm going to introduce them. And with this card, I feel like the game Family Feud right now. I almost wanted to say, come on down, or, so maybe I'll pose questions like top answers. But no, first we have in the middle, Emily Lindsey. She's a PhD, back to Family Feud, Associate Curator and Excavation Site Director at Rancho, La Brea. Dr. Lindsey's research integrates information from past and modern ecosystems to understand how Ice Age animals and environments functioned, how climate change and human actions intersect to drive extinctions, and to predict future ecological responses in the face of modern global change. And we will Sesame Street. These people are so accomplished that we will break this down. And then Mairin, is it Balisi?
Mairin Balisi.
Mairin, I'm sorry, my glasses. Balisi, PhD, from the Augustyn family curator at the Raymond M. Alf Museum of Paleontology. Mairin earned a PhD in ecology and evolutionary biology from UCLA. An expert on fossil mammals, she has researched the Ice Age carnivores from the La Brea tar pits, including dire wolves, for over 15 years. Give it up. And then over here, Jazlyn Mooney, is that correct? Jazlyn. Sesame Street, I said it when I came, for adults. PhD from the Gabilan Assistant Professor of Quantitative and Computational at USC's Dornsife College of Letters, Arts, and Sciences. Her research integrates computational methods with population genetic theory to investigate genetic variation and evolutionary processes in both human and non-human populations. And that ado, we can begin. Okay, shit. And to our audience, thank you for all coming. And one of the things that this is very informal, I said when we began is, I think we all welcome interaction and questions. I think everyone here loves a curious mind. So feel free to, at some point interject. My Family Feud card. Well, to start, I thought it might be useful to talk about how did dire wolves become extinct in the first place. Mairin, as someone, I said it right this time, right? Phew. Mairin, as someone who has studied this species intensely, can you weigh in on this?
Great, thank you. Yes, I'm happy to weigh in on this. So just out of curiosity, is there a question after this that asks, what are dire wolves? Because if not...
let's, these cards are done, you're right. I was given them. I'm not a card reader. But let's begin, because, it's funny. I took advantage of the LA traffic down here, and, it was like on YouTube and, podcasts. Maybe we could start with what exactly is the dire wolf, and then get into what's happened today about the extinction role and our de-extinction, they call it now. But maybe we could begin with just what is exactly a dire wolf and their origins and what makes them special and how did they go extinct?
Great, thank you. So I'm happy to unpack what dire wolves are or were, and then actually I think Emily would be a great person to transition into the extinction, because it's not just the extinction of dire wolves, it's a more widespread extinction. Okay, great. So what are dire wolves, or what were dire wolves? Well, they were tense is important. They were a large wolf-like animal. So we have a dog here in the audience. So think of our dog. Bodhi's a golden retriever? Yeah, but bigger. And its jaws could crush bone. So it's like gray wolves today, but just bigger with more robust jaws. And so that said, it is not closely related to gray wolves today. For the past century, most scientists thought that dire wolves were what we call the sister species to gray wolves. So gray wolves, their scientific name is Canis lupus. Dire wolves, their scientific name used to be Canis dirus, right? And people thought that they were closely related because they look really similar. And it's mainly a size difference in their jaws and their bones, etc., the rest of their bones. However, in 2021, a study was published that was based on ancient DNA and ancient proteins, and this actually showed that dire wolves were an ancient lineage that no longer exists today. So that analysis that was published in 2021 showed that dire wolves actually were ancestral. So if you look at all wolf-like canids today, that includes gray wolf, coyote, dhole, jackals, right? And I think I'm forgetting a couple others in there. Dire wolves were actually at the base of all of those. So they broke off into their own lineage even before, these other like wolf-like canids, right? So that is a pretty deep divergence is what we call it. So dire wolves, in conclusion, they were these large wolf-like predators. They definitely were meat-eating. Their jaws were big enough, robust enough to crush bone. You can see traces of this behavior in their teeth as well. Their teeth are they tend to be more worn, right? As you crush bone, that wears down your teeth. And they went extinct about 10 to 12,000 years ago. And I think Emily can tell you more about that part.
Sure, thanks. That's a great explanation of what are dire wolves. So dire wolves they weren't the only big species that used to live here. In fact, for about the past 50 million years, there have been many species of large mammals dominating pretty much every ice-free continent. So this is true tens of millions of years ago, and it's true up until close to 10,000 years ago, pretty much around the world. So if you think of, say, the classic image of the African savanna, where you have, elephants and giraffes and wildebeest and zebras and hippos and rhinos and lions and cheetahs, that's a normal ecosystem for the Cenozoic, or the time period we call the Age of Mammals, which is about the last 66 million years of Earth's history. And that was the case all over the world until very, very recently in geologic history, when pretty much everywhere except Africa, the vast majority of those large animals went extinct. It was a rapid extinction event, but it happened at slightly different times on different continents. So bringing it back to LA, we know here in Los Angeles, we have the best record of the most recent geologic time period, the Pleistocene or Ice Age epoch, anywhere in the world. And that's the La Brea tar pits, which is about a half-hour drive northwest of here. And at that site, we have about 4,000 direwolves, but we also have thousands of saber-toothed cats. We have horses and bison, extinct larger species of bison, extinct American horses. We have camels. We have about 7 species of cats, most of which are now extinct, most famous being the saber-toothed cat, which is the state fossil of California. But we also have American lions, which are probably the biggest cat that ever lived. We also have short-faced bears, which are probably the largest mammalian predator that ever lived. So it was a very different and, one might say, very scary ecosystem up until about 13,000 years ago. And we know the exact timing because of research that we've been able to do at La Brea tar pits, where the preservation of these fossils is so exquisite that we can get actually geochemical data, including precise radiocarbon dates, out of most of our fossils. And so we know here in LA, the extinction event appears to have been a confluence of climate change that was happening as the world was getting warmer and dry, and Southern California in particular was getting drier coming out of the last ice age, and human activity. And it's been thought for a long time that humans probably were largely implicated in the extinction event, partly because the disappearances of animals on different continents tend to coincide with the arrival of humans on different continents, but nobody really knew how they did it. And here in Southern California, what we discovered is that 13,000 years ago, when all of these large mammals went extinct, coincided with a time of massive widespread wildfires. And these fires, and obviously this is a topic very much front of mind today for those of us living here, this period of fire lasted for about 400 years. And when we come out of it, all of these large animals are gone, including the direwolves.
I'm going to pass the mic down, and maybe you can, as a DNA specialist in genomes.
Yeah.
And I wish they could just interview each other before everyone's here, because it's really quite something. You get up one morning and you've just heard from Colossal Biosciences, it's all over the internet, that the dire wolves have been cloned and made. It's historic. It feels like Jurassic Park, the beginning, and we all know with science is step by step. One, I'm almost curious what your gut reaction was, forget the science, and two, could you elaborate on, is this really possible, and if so, will this be done with these extinct species? But it is, as 3 people who study this, extinction and all this, I'm just curious, we all get up and read the news. I mean, this story must kind of, this must be a little bit different how you all kind of felt, but maybe you could, from a DNA standpoint, genetics.
Happy to. Okay, so my first reaction was no way. And I will say, I do want to say that the technology was the cool part to me, more than the claim of de-extinction. The fact that we could scale this system that we call CRISPR, which essentially allows us to put a little piece of DNA that we might want to mutate on a guide. It's called a guide. And then CRISPR will basically go to some place in the genome where there's a pattern it recognizes, cut the DNA and insert a mutation. So I was like, the fact that they can do this at the scale that they're doing it is amazing. So I thought the technology was amazing. When the article came out that they had de-extincted direwolves, the first thing that I said was, well, where's the paper? How have they done it? What's really going on? And this is coming from someone who knows Beth Shapiro, who's doing the science and leading the science here, the chief scientific officer. When I read the paper to kind of figure out what are they actually doing, right? So what they're doing is they got DNA from these ancient fossils somehow, which is also amazing, by the way. Getting DNA from ancient specimens is an art. It's hard to do, but also what I want to say is it's messy. So it's not always very reliable. So in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, the genetics, maybe not that reliable, but it's the best that we've got right now. So what they do is they say, okay, let's look at this genome of the direwolf and let's take the most closely related thing that we can find. They go to the gray wolf. And this is their claim of the most closely related thing. And they look for what they thought were genes that made the difference morphologically between direwolves and gray wolves. So they just went to the genome. A very, very small fraction of your genome actually is made up of genes. And they said basically, what are the differences in this direwolf that we're looking at and this gray wolf? And what they did was they found, I think, about 20 genes that they thought had differences between direwolves and gray wolves. And then what they do is they take CRISPR and they take cells and they basically made 14 edits in those 20 genes. So that's amazing. Cool technology. There are more than 20 differences between myself and my mother. I don't think we're different. Maybe some people are different species than their parents, but I wouldn't say that I am in particular. So in one generation, meaning between you and your parents, there are more than 100 new mutations, or floating around 100 new mutations between you and your parents. So it seems to me a little bit paltry to say that you've genetically de-extincted this species when there's more differences between me and my mom than this gray wolf and a dire wolf. So my first thought was no way, and then my second thought was no way. But I will say I thought the tech was amazing. That was the thing for me. I was like, this technology is amazingly cool, from the genomics perspective.
And I mean, I might as go down the line since you all specialize in, extinction and excavation. I mean, what were your own reactions, and do you share the same feeling, or how does it move you? Because,
I heard about the direwolf story shortly before it broke, and it was really surreal for me. I just get in a mysterious email like, oh, can you talk about direwolves? And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. Just a casual chat about direwolves. I'm a direwolf person, so I guess this is to be expected. And it was anything but a casual chat. So I'll just say that. And it was very surreal to hear about this from a journalist, And yeah, it's also really surreal as, with someone who's studied, I've handled the bones of at least 100 direwolves individuals in my life, right? I know this animal relatively well, and yet there's still a lot that's not known about it. It's why we're still studying the fossils, right? So we are still studying, like right now, my students and I are studying the fossils of this animal from, not from the La Brea tar pits, but from a different place in the Central Valley of California called McKittrick, because that place is understudied and the direwolves seem to be different there from here. And that's very cool. That's something that we did not know before. That study is in prep. So that said, you know, it's very weird to me as someone who knows this species, but also recognizes the limitations of what we know about this species. It's strange to me that people felt that they knew enough to try to bring it back, that they knew what was important, that they knew what was functionally important. Because, you know, like things like color, things like the bone cracking behavior, right? We know they crack bones, but are you going to have these direwolves, you know, these direwolves crack bones, things like that. And factors like behavior. We think that they were social animals based on the wonderful record at the La Brea tar pits. And because of that social behavior, you know, like if you have 3 direwolf pups that look very cute, but how are they going to learn how to be a direwolf, right? So there's all these different things that just kind of flitted through my head when I first heard about the news.
Yeah, I think to build on that, you know, I agree. I'm not a geneticist, a genomicist, but I agree that you know, it's not de-extincting a lineage. I mean, lineages, species are based on evolutionary relationships. They took a quite distantly related species, modified some genes to make it potentially look like what direwolves might have looked like, but it's still, you know, they didn't change the underlying evolutionary relationships. But I think the other question, kind of to get to your point, is why? You know, not just, yeah, is it a direwolf, but what's the end game here? Because again, like, these animals existed in a context. We have more than 24 species of large extinct mammals just at the La Brea tar pits alone that coexisted with the direwolves, right? And so if you're bringing back even something sort of what you claim to be the functional equivalent of a species, where is the opportunity for it to perform that function if all of its prey are extinct, all of its competitors are extinct, and the ecosystem that it's living in not only is no longer considered part of the Pleistocene, but is getting farther and farther away from that every year because of human-caused climate change. And then I guess another question is, you know, this is touted as a big breakthrough for conservation, and I agree with you. I think that tech could be a big breakthrough for conservation. I think there's a lot of potential applications there, but to take a formerly extinct species, even if we could, you know, bring back, genetically clone a direwolf, you know, the idea of conserving a species or a species recovering is based on wild breeding populations. And if you have, you know, a handful of individuals, they're genetically modified. We have no idea if they can interbreed and produce young. We have no idea what the young phenotype or genotype would be. Would they just sort of regress back to gray wolves within a few generations? And what function could they possibly perform in an ecosystem that has no other large extinct mammals in it?
Yeah, the question why was definitely my first response to the journalist when they were like, yeah, they brought fire direwolves back. I was like, why? Like, because, hey, did you know that we have gray wolves? Like,
I have to wonder the way you see the speed of communication today. On one hand, you could say that it's maybe spurred a whole new interest in science for a younger generation to say, wow, this is possible, like, and kind of almost kindled an interest in your field. Or on the other hand, is it almost like, you know, frustrating because it almost belittles the field a little bit? And is it just an event? You know, these are VC-backed companies that really plan on monetizing this. So I was just curious, when you feel that media rush, is it a pro, a con, maybe a little of both?
Can I? I think one of the things so I have a close collaborator, Dr. Ellie Armstrong, who does a lot of work with conservation. Specifically, I would say I'm the person behind the computer typing. She's doing all the like boots on the ground kind of work. And one of the first things that she told me was, where are we going to put these? Exactly what was brought up here. Why would you bring it back? And then the thought is, where would you put it? What's the purpose? Especially because there's tons of rescues already that are filled with hybrids, like these dog-wolf hybrids, because people get them. They don't realize how big they actually are. We do work with captive tigers. There's people who get captive tigers, and they have them in their apartment until they're too big for them to deal with in some cases. So I think like one of the big things that I thought in terms of thinking about conservation is, I love that the tech is here, but why aren't we focused on what we have right now? Not bringing back something that's been long gone. And I think this is something I'll pass to both of you, because we talked about this a bit in the back, is, this is great technology potentially, but how are we using it? And like, what do we do moving forward? So that was kind of my take, like outside the sphere of conservation, but being in close contact with people who are doing the work is, what about the stuff we have? How do we maintain?
Yeah, I agree. And also, I mean, on that note, like, think of how much pushback there is to gray wolves even trying to reoccupy parts of their range that they were in a few decades to a century ago, right? Like people are freaking out about it. They're hunting them. They're on the endangered species list, right? Like, we can't even get people to accept the return of gray wolves, which are still here and just trying to go back to where they were in historic times. So it seems pretty delusional to think that people are going to be happy with a larger, more carnivorous version of this animal, like, when they're walking their dog up, in the park above their house or something.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, what was the question?
I think
No,
we
I
get
think-
it. It was
yeah,
just-
I think-
it was
I think,
more with, one of the things I just sometimes question is the sensational, the media coverage has been so incredible. And so when I was told to come to speak, to come talk to you, I started, listening, and I mean, the variety of press and on one hand, that's how I looked at it. There's always a balance, no right or wrong. On one hand, I think it sparks a lot of curiosity in the sciences and, whets an appetite for almost something that hasn't really attracted maybe as many people. But on the flip, there is a lot of miscommunication going on, and where's the balance, and, how does that affect you? When we were talking in the back room, this isn't about fashion. It's really about you ladies, but I've worked a lot with endangered animals, a lot. And, no matter where you go, there's this, where do you find the balance between, progress and conservation? And there's no right or wrong, but without land corridors, all the apex predators are going to go extinct. There's really no way about it, because they need land to roam. It's a very big issue. And so, back to it, what you were saying. I mean, even here in Los Angeles, my mother, I don't know, people know she just is completing the Annenberg Wildlife Crossing. That's called a land corridor, because they're, thanks, she'll appreciate that. Thank you. But it's so when you talk about a reintroduction of new species, it certainly would be nice in that same, to be breadth of conversation, to talk about the survival of our species. And hey, if you say you're going to bring back the dire wolf because we're going to do land corridors throughout the world to protect all ecosystems, let's do it. But I think that's, a really big issue, since we're talking about the role of extinction today, is, it's the balance of what is defining progress, I guess. But this is really, I'm sorry, not about, it's about hearing from you. But that was the first thing that crossed my mind, is what I'm saying is, I was just shooting a film. I was telling them with orangutans in Borneo, and it's, without corridors, you're nowhere. So whatever animal you plan on bringing back, and then you have delicate ecosystems, which is what you study, and what will be the impact of an ecosystem to other apex predators if you brought back a dire wolf or a woolly mammoth. How does that change the balance of what now has been, I guess we'll say, the dire wolf went extinct when? How long ago?
Here in LA, around 13,000 years ago, might have survived a couple thousand years later in other parts of North or South America. But pretty much all of these species in the Americas disappeared by about 12,000 years ago.
Why is it when I talk to scientists, either I feel so young because 13,000 years ago, they make sound like that was yesterday. And I'm like thinking how old I am. I mean, 13, think about that for a minute, 13,000 years ago. But it's like a speck. And she was telling me in the DNA science in the back room that a cell, if broken apart, could expand to the moon and back.
So DNA is
I'm off topic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess this is going back to thinking about the dire wolf and the DNA and how they're modifying these cells, right? Because I told you, like, CRISPR is this great technology where we put a little guide and CRISPR, like, will go to some part of the genome where it sees a pattern and it cuts the genome. It'll introduce your mutation that you want it to introduce. And this is great technology, even in terms of humans. Like, we could potentially use it to treat something like sickle cell, something like this, where there's a single mutation. But like I was saying, the genome itself, when you think of how big it is and how much they've had to do to sequence this dire wolf, if you look at a human genome, your DNA is super coiled together. And if you were to actually unravel it, you could make it to like the sun and back. Like, it is super, super tightly coiled in a single cell. And then this is like thinking about how many cells are in your body. That's like a trip it's crazy, right? And that's like the amount of DNA that's in your body. And then to kind of go back to the dire wolf, right? Like saying like you've somehow found these 20 key differences that make a dire wolf. It sounds kind of bananas to me because, right? Like if I'm saying there's 100 differences between me and my parents, then those 20 could be nothing. And then we also have to think in terms of like, I think when I was thinking about journalism and media, I think the term de-extinction is the thing here. Like, that's the selling point, is that we can de-extinct something. I guess my mind immediately went to, shouldn't the media care about the things that we don't want to go extinct that are already here? And if I can, for example, just to elaborate a little bit, the company says that they've de-extincted the dire wolf because they've made something that they're following the morphological species concept, which means it should look like these bones that we're getting, and these old ancient remains that we have. I mean, yet to be seen on that. But for example, this concept just says it's great for paleontology because that's all we have left. So we have fossils left. So looking at morphology is great. But now we have DNA and we have a biological species concept. And I don't think it's following the biological species concept. So like, that's the kind of thing that I immediately thought about, is like, how do we, and we talked about this a bit in the back too, if we think about the differences between, like, say, myself and an orangutan or gorilla, like, what are the differences that made a human, considering how much of the genome we share? So how can we make 20 different, have 20 genes and 14 different sites and say that I've made a dire wolf? I've always been more fascinated with, like, what's here? How do we maintain that?
I promise to open up questions more to the audience, and you can see this can go. So if people have questions and would like to ask, it's a really wonderful opportunity. Oh, well, I think I do see hands raised.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah, but the lights are.
yeah, you can just stay on. They're here.
So these creatures that were created, would they be considered a different species or a mutation, or how would you classify them?
I think this is really bad that I'm about to say. So there's a great actual video by Hank Green where he talks about the dire wolves, and in fact Beth responds, and then he talks a little bit more. I did like his idea of, like, it's sort of like almost like a synthetic species that we've kind of made, because one, If we want to say that the species is defined based on behavior, well, it was raised by a domestic dog. So who knows, like, how would it develop direwolf behaviors? If we want to say morphological, I don't think that it's going to look, this is my bet also, and we can talk a little bit more, but like, I don't think that it's actually going to follow the morphological species concept in the way that's been claimed either. So I did like his take of like this kind of synthetic species that we've made, but Emily made a great point of like, in a few generations, we could just get a gray wolf back. And that's all about what like work that we do too, is like, just by random chance, I could just end up with a gray wolf again. So there's no reason to think that they've just like brought this species back and it's going to stay around.
Hi, I was wondering if at some point, either currently or in the near future, when the technology exists to sequence either as much of the genome as either we can now or in the future of any extinct species, and given like in 10 to 15 years, either through the development of either CRISPR or bridge editing, could we create true de-extinct species, at least on the genetic level, even if there's a few gaps in the sequence?
Okay. I was going to open it up for you, Jazlyn.
Okay.
I just wanted to clarify first that ancient DNA differs from modern DNA in that it is always degraded, right? And that creates technical difficulties.
That, and also Emily can also probably speak to this too, getting DNA out of something from the tar pits. Good luck. Is maybe what I would say.
We've tried many, many times.
So it's really, really hard to do. So right now we do have the technology to sequence an entire genome and sequence it really, really well. So in humans, we actually just made the first complete human genome ever. It's called a telomere to telomere genome. And it's this year, actually last year, that they published this genome. And we started working on the human genome, which has the most resources, the most attention in like the early 2000s. So I feel like it'd take a really long time to do that. And also I think that we're still at this kind of conundrum of what exactly makes a species. Even like, we don't have really great genes that dictate behavior. We don't know. And learned behavior, I don't know how you would introduce a mutation that will tell you how something's going to learn and react. So I feel like even if we could, I don't think that we could make those changes and actually expect that we're going to get back something that we lost, 13,000 years ago. And we don't know everything about their behaviors. So I think it'd be really tough to do. And yeah, that's just going to be like a big hurdle for them to overcome, which is why I think they've gone for the morphological kind of definition.
Right. So, are people generally familiar with the process of, quote unquote, de-extinction, or should we unpack it? Okay. So it involves more than just reconstructing the DNA, right? When you go from the ancient DNA of an extinct animal to a whole new animal, right? Like, it involves not just the DNA, but you also need cells. And there are no living direwolf cells that we know of, right? So we would have to use the living cells of, and I'm saying direwolf, but this could apply to the woolly mammoth or the dodo or the thylacine, like the Tasmanian wolf, right? Or any other extinct species. I don't know, a T-Rex, right? So you would have to have, ancient DNA, which is difficult to get, and always fragmentary. And then you would need to basically put it into, over some Sesame Street for de-extinction, right? And then you put it into a living cell. Again, there's no direwolf cells, so you have to use the living cells of a close relative, which in this case supposedly was the gray wolf. And then you have to implant it into something, right? And what's that something going to be? In this case, it was a domestic dog, right? Why do you think they use domestic dog? probably because the gray wolf, is endangered. There are rules around it, right? So there are these multiple hurdles. And that's assuming that the domestic dog or whatever surrogate species that becomes the host, that's assuming that it will carry this embryo to term, right? And there's just multiple hurdles along the way, which I think amplifies the risk of failure. So, the fact that these quote unquote de-extincted dire wolves are born, that is technologically cool, right? Just that, are they actually dire wolves? I'm with Jazlyn on this.
I have a question right here.
Basically, this kind of ties into the last question, but what I'm wondering is that how do we even get this ancient genome and ancient DNA? And could we use a similar method to get DNA from creatures as far back as such as Anomalocaris?
You should take the ancient DNA. Well, okay. I can't speak on. So I'm. What I should say is the process of getting ancient DNA, like we've said a bunch of times, is really difficult. There's been techniques that are constantly being developed. For example, there's one of the first papers ever that came out about ancient DNA. This person who has won a Nobel claimed that they sequenced a mummy. The environment was contaminated. They sequenced themselves. So there was some mummy in there, but they also accidentally sequenced themselves. And this is just to say that, like, whenever you hear about science or read anything scientific, always question it. That's how our science grows. That's how it develops, is curiosity. With ancient DNA, a lot of the development of that technology has been very, very recent. And we kind of do it in hindsight, right? Like, he realized, oops, I didn't actually sequence entirely mummy. I sequenced myself too. So then we got, what were called clean rooms. So you have to have very sterile rooms to get high quality ancient DNA. The other thing you can do, sequence yourself to make sure that you're not in there too, right? As far as getting older and older data to think about sequencing, it's possible. My bet would be that it would depend a lot on the environment that the fossils are in. And for example, that's probably why there's big gaps in our fossil record around the world, is because sometimes the environment is not conducive to fossils even being there. And you can imagine if we found something at all, there might not be any DNA that's usable left.
Yeah, I don't work on DNA, but people who do have told me that when you find DNA in a fossil, any ancient DNA, it's always an anomaly. Like, the norm is to not have any DNA preserved. The tar pits, we have millions of fossils. We have not gotten DNA out of any of them because probably the extremophile microbes that can live in our tar are really good at eating DNA, and lots of things are really good at eating DNA. Even though you can stretch it out to the sun and back, when it's all coiled up, it's really small and easy and a lot easier to eat than a lot of other things. Conditions have to be just right. Anomalocaris, it would be amazing, but that's 500 million years old. There's very unlikely to be any biotic tissues remaining. All of the fossils that we find going that far back in time are fully mineralized replicas of the original organism.
Yeah, unfortunately, DNA doesn't last super duper long. So if we're talking hundreds of millions of years, doubtful. But, if something happens, that's really cool. I don't think we should try to de-extinct it, but just let me know if you find DNA that's old.
Another on this side.
Hi. So you touched up a little bit on the thylacine or the Tasmanian tiger. I want to get a geneticist's view as far as the technology with CRISPR, because you touched up on DNA damage being done with the species. But there's claims that through wet specimens, the thylacine genome has been mapped. Is CRISPR the path to it, or is it just not viable now that we're seeing what we're seeing with the claims of dire wolf with gene editing and things like that?
So I don't think I've ever read a paper on this, so I can't comment specifically. What I would say is like CRISPR's a great tool. It doesn't scale well. So that was the magnificent thing here is in general, like for example, it's really, really hard to integrate CRISPR into a cell, period. For example, in humans, I think originally they were using like a molecule of gold to like try to penetrate like the cell. So like it's hard to do at scale. It also, these are living cells. So like you could kill them too, is the other thing. And then we have to keep them alive and clone, which is another step. But I feel like, I don't think that would bring it back in any way. I guess meaningfully, like, I don't know how you would de-extinct an entire population and have enough individuals to actually maintain a species, or like some level of a species. I think what's more interesting is like, say, we have tons of, I don't know, data about like, there's tons of insects that are going extinct, right? And there's lots of insects still left. So like, can we figure out like just how we can use technology to like learn about them and conserve them? Because I think one thing that we haven't talked about here is kind of like, how do we decide what species are listed and delisted for IUCN? And it turns out that now genomics is being factored into that at times. And so my real interest in conservation is like, how do we do the best genomics on what we have, especially if someone's going to go to, you know, a meeting and say like, this species looks really healthy based on genetic data. If the data's bad, we could be, you know, putting that species into a doom loop. So I feel like I can't say, I feel like CRISPR is not the answer to bring anything back. And it's hard, but it's interesting.
Okay, I wanted actually to add to your thylacine question, and I think we should talk about the red wolf.
Yeah.
Right? Like we're here for dire wolves, but yeah, the red wolf is a species of actual conservation concern.
Yeah.
And so Jazlyn, you had mentioned something like, like bringing back a population or reviving a population, and how that may or may not be done using CRISPR. What do you think about the efforts to use these de-extinction technologies for reviving the red wolf?
Tough question. And I like the people who do the work with red wolf. Ben Sachs, who's doing great work, is at Davis. I think Bridget von Holtz at Princeton is collaborating a lot with Beth for this effort. I don't know what we do. As far as the genomics, it seems to me that our efforts would be better placed on bringing awareness to these populations, trying to conserve them as best we can. How many folks in here have heard about the Channel Island foxes? A good number of people, right? Like that is an amazing tale of like what maybe I think the best example of de-extinction might be, which is bringing these Channel Island foxes. There were like 13 foxes left on some of these islands, and somehow we managed through efforts with conservation management entities and a bunch of different groups to bring those 13 individuals into a zoo, to breed them and to bring this population back. And now though, they are not scared of people. I feel like they should be a little more scared than they are, but like that is an amazing like story. And there's folks in the Natural History Museum who've worked on the Channel Island foxes, and especially during that time period. And it's just amazing, like amazing coordinated effort of like, you know, we have to trap them. We have to bring the bald eagles back. We have to get rid of the feral hogs that were like on the island. And so I feel like the red wolf, I feel like most of the effort should be like, how do we maintain what we have, more than try to rescue it from like a genomics kind of perspective with mutating the genome maybe?
I have another question here.
I actually have two questions. The first one goes back to the what we were talking about at the beginning about the relationship of the dire wolf to modern wolves. You implied that they're no longer Canis dirus. What is the new genus name?
Thank you. It's Aenocyon dirus.
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Aenocyon.
Can you spell that?
Aenocyon.
Okay, second question is question: why dire wolves? And I'm wondering to what there's so many cool prehistoric animals. I'm wondering what role the popularity of Game of Thrones had to do with the choice of dire wolves.
Oh, that's a wonderful question. Thank you. Okay, so before you step away from the naming, though, I do want to clarify that so the 2021 paper that I mentioned that that established the direwolf as an ancient lineage, and that also reestablished the direwolf as being Aena-Scion-Dirus rather than Canis-Dirus. Okay, so that was the officially published paper. With these de-extincted direwolves, Colossal also released a preprint, so that is an unpublished manuscript. It is currently about to be reviewed. And that manuscript suggests that this is where they say, oh, actually, just kidding, the direwolf is still close to the gray wolf, but yet to be reviewed, vetted by external scientists, right? However, that new preprint, it still does say there's still Aena-Scion. All right, so that's good news for us. We don't have to redo our labels right away.
We actually haven't redone them to Aena-Scion yet.
Emily.
It takes a while to relabel 160,000 specimens.
Okay. All right, now the next part of the question was why dire wolves, and what does Game of Thrones have to do with it? So fun fact, this preprint that Colossal put out, guess who is a co-author? George R.R. Martin.
And he's more senior than some actual scientists on that.
So, make of that what you will. I do think that there are other reasons, right, for why the dire wolf. The gray wolf is one of the best. It's a species that we know a lot about because of our domestic dogs, right? So we understand, or I think, I don't know, dog genomicist over here, we understand the dog genome relatively well. And of course, domestic dogs are a subspecies of gray wolf, right? So because, we submit our dog's information to, like, I don't know, the dog version of 23andMe.
Embark.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, because of that, all these companies have our data, and we know a lot about our dogs.
Another question on this side. Thank you all for coming out tonight. One of the things that has been talked about is the ancient nature of the DNA and lack of understanding about behavior. So could we or should we use the application of this technology for species that have gone recently extinct, like within human memory, like living memory, that we maybe have that kind of information about, such as like the ivory-billed woodpecker, and especially ones that have been extinct because of human intervention?
I guess I'm at an impasse where I'm so worried about, like, yes, we've made them go extinct. I would love to bring them back. I don't know how we manage the implications for everything else that's there and is now occupying that ecological space. I'm not an ecologist. I'm sure an ecologist could give you a much better answer. That's the immediate thing that comes to mind is, like, for example, in humans, we say a generation is about 30 years. In some of these species, it might be 1 year. So actually what that means is, like, almost like time is sped up for them relative to us. So that's one thing. I feel like that's the biggest thing that I thought about immediately was kind of what's the impact on what we already have if we reintroduce something. And if we can do it, how do we do it in a way that we can maintain the ecosystem as is? Because, like, my mind immediately goes to something like plants, like ice plants. Ice plants are super invasive, and they're everywhere here in California. We want to remove those because they throttle the native plants that are already here. I don't want de-extinction to occur, and then what happens is we extinct something else that was there and is now kind of occupying this space. So that was my big dilemma with thinking about de-extinction on these terms of what should we bring back? Should we bring back recently extinct things?
Yeah, I mean, these are questions that are even being looked into reintroductions, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a petition filed a number of years ago to reintroduce grizzly bears into California. Grizzly bears, very important in California. They're on our state flag. But they haven't, the last one was hunted out in the 1920s, right? And so even figuring out what was the ecological role of grizzly bears in, historic and prehistoric times before they were hunted out, and what does that mean for how they might behave, occupy, interact with the ecosystem where they reintroduced, has been the subject of years of intense research on living grizzly bears in other parts of North America, but also fossil and subfossil grizzly bears in museum collections, including at the La Brea tar pits. What did they eat? Where did they mostly live? What sort of different plant species did they depend on, right? Like there's tons and tons and tons of research that needs to be done just to understand a species that's still alive and went extinct in our state a century ago.
Yeah, and going back to the thylacine as well, so that is an example of a species that went extinct in human memory, right? And yet, if we do succeed in quote unquote bringing it back, right, using wet specimens, which there are some in museums in Australia, even if that happens, right, is it going to face the same challenges that drove it to extinction, right? So are you going to have laws that regulate and enforcement of those laws, right? That regulate hunting or that govern land use? Are you going to instill cultural change in people, just a shift in mindset, right? So I think there needs to be a more systemic, a more concerted effort. Even if, these technologies can be are promising, but they're not, there needs to be a more well-rounded, multifaceted solution. And it will take all of us. So thank you all for being here.
Yeah, so Charlie, we have one more question. And if we didn't get to your question, please join us in the reception afterwards, if you have time to talk to one of our panelists. One more question on that side.
Hi. You mentioned earlier kind of this why, bring direwolves back and how would they fit into any kind of contemporary ecosystem. I guess kind of my question is a bit broad, but with how much media coverage this stunt brought in, do you see this really as something that can be beneficial, or where do you see this technology really going? Is this the idea of bringing back the direwolf just kind of a PR stunt to drum up more venture capital money that can then be diverted to some other ultimate goal? And, the ideas of really using it for conservation are just kind of thrown into the wind at the moment to kind of help generate more buzz?
Good question. So I think Colossal and the people involved with it, have always been very, their stated sort of ultimate goal is woolly mammoths, I think, right? And they do make an argument that large animals, and this is true, they're often referred to as keystone species, like they have really outsized roles in an ecosystem. And so Their idea is that if they could de-extinct woolly mammoths or create sort of a really would be like a furry, cold-adapted kind of mammoth-elephant hybrid functional equivalent, as they would say, of a woolly mammoth, they could put the mammoths up in sort of far northern areas. And these animals, because they have such, they're wide ranging, they're very large, they eat a lot, they poop a lot, they turn up the soil, that their argument is that these animals could actually help fight climate change by changing the kind of functioning of the tundra. And there's these Russian brothers, the Zimov brothers, who own a bunch of land in Siberia and are like, yes, we will take your mammoths. So there's that stated goal. It's problematic. Again, you're bringing back one species that without the rest of the species in its ecosystem, without the same climate conditions that it lived in. And it's not even really that species. And so, there's a lot of unintended consequences that could arise from that. And it seems to be sort of, from my perspective, it's kind of a either naive or disingenuous argument. We know that we are living in a very anomalous time right now. The last 50 plus million years our planet was dominated by very large mammals that weren't us. And between about 50,000 years ago and today, that balance has shifted. And so like 50 million to 50,000, like that's a very recent change, but that's where we are. We're not going to have, 7 carnivores that could eat us walking around Los Angeles and still be having events like this tonight, right? So I think that it's important to recognize the important role that these animals played. It's important to recognize in what ways the planet is different today from what it is used to being, maybe. But we have to move forward with that knowledge in the context that we live in. And we're not going to go back to the Ice Age.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you all for sharing so much wisdom tonight. Incredible. Never stop learning. Be curious.